Welcome to this episode of our program Daily Debate. As usual, we will be discussing an important debate. Today we'll be focusing on the Libyan committee meetings that were hosted by Egypt and was sponsored under the supervision of the United Nations. The UN Special Envoy for Libya, Stephanie Williams, announced that the joint committee formed of the Libyan of members of the Libyan House of Representatives and the Libyan High Council of State were able to reach the initial consensus on 137 articles. Chapter 2 on the rights and freedoms, as well as on the chapters of legislative and judicial authority, with the exception of a handful of articles of the draft constitution. The UN envoy extended her appreciation for Egypt and for its full support for the UN efforts in Libya to promote a lasting political solution for the Libyan crisis. The talks itself aimed at ending this long transitional period that Libya has witnessed since 2011. So as to regain its position and fulfill the aspirations of the Libyan people at large. Libyans are really longing for their country to regain back its strength, to become a functional state once more, and to take its position in the Arab world. Egypt has been in close contacts always with all the Libyan parties and has exerted great efforts for the end, or rather for this end result, hopefully, to take place soon. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi already vowed Egypt's full support for Libya's stability and gave his directives for all Egyptian institutions to participate in the process of the reconstruction of this brotherly country. This is Egypt's position, this is Egypt diplomacy, and this diplomacy has been constant towards conflicts and unrests, unrests in all brotherly Arab and African countries, and has worked for this cause and for the causes of the region and the continent, and has addressed them from the different angles and spheres. Marking the Africa Day, the President has stressed that Egypt will continue working along with African brothers to achieve sustainable development and on enhancing joint efforts to resolve the issues and disputes that the continent has suffered from for decades and that have prevented the dreams of its sons, or rather the continent's sons, from coming true. We'll be speaking about that tonight, or this particular file. We'll be discussing this with our very distinguished guests that we are always honored to have her. Her Excellency Ambassador Mervat Telawy, former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, and thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we delve into our discussion, let's first have this quick report. Egypt vows full support for Libya's stability. Let's watch.
Cairo hosted the Libyan second round of the constitutional track dialogue, which was attended by representatives of the House of Representatives and the Tripoli-based High Council of State, and facilitated by UN Special Advisor on Libya, Stephanie Williams. The stated purpose was to agree on a constitutional framework for the elections. During the past 2 weeks, parallel sets of talks have brought Libyan players together in Egypt and Switzerland. In Cairo, Williams announced that the joint committee of HOR and HCS delegates who were in Cairo to discuss the draft constitution that had been adopted by the Constitutional Drafting Assembly in 2017 had reached an initial consensus on 137 articles. These included Chapter 2 on rights and freedoms and the 2 chapters on legislative and judicial authorities, with the exception of a handful of articles. She urged participants to continue consultations towards reaching a consensus on the remaining articles. A third round is scheduled for June to settle the outstanding differences. The parallel Cairo and Montreux meetings are indicative of a dual strategy. On the one hand, they reflect the international community's determination to build up the momentum of the current political process, regardless of the shortcomings and the uncertainty of the results. On the other hand, it appears that preparations are being laid out for an alternative process in the event the current one collapses due to the intransigence of the main Libyan parties. The Egyptian Foreign Ministry expressed its confidence that the efforts of the Joint Committee would put Libya on the path to stability, security and development, stressing that Cairo would continue to sponsor the Libyan constitutional track based on its ties and balanced relations with all parties. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has expressed Egypt's unwavering support for Libya to hold presidential and parliamentary elections, stressing Egypt's support for the efforts to achieve Libya's greater interests and preserve its territorial integrity. Meanwhile, the head of the Egypt-based Arab Organization for Industrialization said it will participate with its various companies and factories in the initiative to rebuild Libya.
Right, welcome back, and back to you, Your Excellency. And those meetings, those recent meetings, those are not the first meetings to take place or to be hosted here in Cairo, because Egypt has always been in favor of a political settlement in Libya, part of its national strategy. How do you assess the latest meetings that took place here in Egypt?
Well, the important thing is that the action taken by Egypt since several years is avoiding the dismantling of the country of Libya, and not to allow the foreign
interference
in Libya to be dismantled. And this have succeeded to a great extent due to what President Sisi did. And we can see the difference now between the position of Turkey today and a couple of months ago. So everybody is allying around Egypt to move to put the different groups within Libya together, so we can have the head of the country, the main responsible, and then the constitutional entities like the charter, the parliament, the election, the parties. These are the elements that then we would say Libya is a real solid country. So what we have seen in Cairo recently about this committee is exactly try to finish what was started, and as the representative of the UN said, they finished 130 something articles.
37, yes.
37 articles from the Constitution, including 2 important chapters, and the remaining are to be discussed also. It would appear that it's the meeting did not achieve all what we hoped to see, but in itself, the meeting and the direction toward setting up the constitution, the election, the parties, this is in itself a step in the right direction. Of course, the details usually take more time than the bigger issues, But in itself, it is a right move. I hope the next meeting will take place also to finish or continue what they started. But the essential thing is that now we are seeing that the militia and these groups of fighters are moving out of Libya. Not all, but some. And this is a good indication that Libya would rest in peace if these foreign elements, whether at the decision-making level, like the position of America, of England, of countries, or the acts by this militia group inside the country. So I think we are moving in the right direction. It might take some time because the election used to be last January or December, and then they said they needed 2 months. Now we are in the 5th month, and still we didn't finish. But anyway, the move is toward the right direction.
Your Excellency, here, yes, indeed, Egypt has made all the efforts, the needed efforts for getting together all the Libyan parties and host them. This is, I don't know, this is one of the numbers of meetings that took place here in Egypt. But the situation in the meeting does not reflect what is going on in Libya. Yes, indeed, Egypt was able to put an end to some of the external forces' interference, particularly of what concerns mercenaries of some countries who are in proxy war in Libya. But still, the issue is not clear, since we are seeing mercenaries from the Libyan tribes themselves. How do you describe the situation inside Libya? What is hindering a breakthrough in or an impasse to the Libyan complete stability?
Several things. The tribes, and they want to assure their presence and their representation in whatever entity you are developing, whether it is the parliament or the parties or the constitution. So every tribe wants a bigger share. And this is one of the reasons why we have this in and out action that make stability in Libya not reach easily. So this is one. The other, of course, the mercenaries that you refer to. 3, the fact of the international movement or international policies. Do the big power want stability in Libya? Libya is a rich country. It has oil, gas, and we know that there are many parties outside Libya who are interested in this oil and gas. Maybe it is easier for them to get what they want from the gas and oil when it is a troubled country or have no dynamism controlled by the constitution and the government and all
strong
of this.
institutions. And yes.
So this would be also one of the points that which we are not naive. We know now that the wars in the Middle East all of the country in the Middle East, and even the Ukraine-Russian war, it's all about economic benefit and war by proxy and hidden agenda. And this is not in the interest neither of the Ukraine or Russia, for instance. So it's the same for Libya. This power who wants to put their hand on oil in Libya, maybe it's not in their interest to have a solid country with identified institution that would say yes or no or prevent and this action and so on.
Ambassador Telawy, you were the Undersecretary General of the United Nations, and you have played a role there when you submitted Egypt's vision in this important chapter about women and women violence. But working in the United Nations, how do you view the role played by the United Nations in conflicts, or in solving or putting a lasting political solution to conflicts?
Very weak. So bluntly, I would say, the UN is not playing its real role, and it's giving in to pressure by the superpower, unfortunately. And whether it is economic, political, and so on. More and more the political power in the world, in their interest is to have a weaker United Nations, not a stronger United Nations. And here we should not forget the role of Dr. Boutros Ghali when he was Under Secretary of the organization, and he has a definite agenda for peace. Of course, it was not on the liking of the American and the representative in the United Nations. So the answer bluntly, no. The rule is weak, and I cannot blame Guterres, because the moment he will become very courageous, he will be out of the post.
Right. Here, returning back to what we were speaking about, and there are points still at stake. I mean, here, okay, maybe it's the kind of support that we need is a collective and united stance behind Libyans, so as to we can help them reach the consensus they need, or come together for and prioritize the interests of their own country. What do Libyans need from the Arab world, or the Arab region, or the Arab powers at this very particular time?
First of all, that the Libya issue should be a top priority for every country, because the more the Arab world loses one country, like we lost Iraq, for instance, after the invasion, and up to now, we cannot get back to the real Iraq power.
Strong, powerful Iraq,
Yeah.
yes, it used to be, indeed.
So this is very important. We don't say, I know the world is about to enter third world conference, war, so we are interested now in Ukraine, Russian. No, this is another story. there should be no other matter that has priority for the Arab country except keeping the Arab country safe and one entity. But if we dissolve every and each country to pieces, then there is no power for the Arab country. This is number one. Number two, that we should have one voice in the United Nations, in the African Union, in whatever meeting that is organized about Libya. So Egypt should not say this way, and Syria or Iraq or Emirate say another thing. We should have 3-4 main points for the safety of the Libyan and the future of Libya, and we all work around those couple of points. This would encourage the Libyan that all the Arab are behind them. Number three, you need to have, what is the name of the lady in charge by the United Nations?
Stephanie Williams.
Stephanie. You need to have assistant to Stephanie Williams from the Arab countries, from the region, that could be a mediator between this group and the other entity and the third. She cannot do that. She is a foreigner. She does not know the mentality. And she needs an Arab mind behind her who would research and would mediate, and so it would facilitate her task. This is very important because I've seen in many problems the Secretary General is employing or appointing foreigner like the Swedish guy in Yemen. What the hell can he know about Yemen? Maybe he's a very respected gentleman, very bright, very everything, but he does not know what does it mean tribe, who is against who is with who. So the fact that...
How the tribal mentality works,
yeah,
in the first place.
and he doesn't know the Arabic language, he doesn't know the culture, he doesn't know the history. How can he solve the actual problem? So these people, these representatives, the UN wants to be neutral, so they bring Stephanie, I don't know what's her, from where she came, her nationality, or from a Swedish gentleman. I mean, they want to prove that they are neutral, but neutrality not to the extent. You have to fill in the gap of this neutrality by having somebody who is from the region, 1 or 2 person, an analyst that can mediate and can improve the situation.
And this is why Egypt has been supporting the United Nations effort, but also working as this mediator, as Egypt is acceptable to all parties inside Libya.
Egypt, you are right, Egypt is accepted by everybody inside Libya, regardless of the fight between themselves or the differences between themselves. That's why the move by Egypt put a limit to the interference of the foreigner inside. So there is a voice from the Arab world that say, stop here, up to this limit, there is no interference. And what President Sisi made and said was the main core of the discussion in many other places that was held. So they say the program of Sisi, the ideas of Sisi about Libya in wherever meeting they organized.
Here, Ambassador Telawy, despite Egypt's great efforts for a brotherly country, and Egypt has been doing that for all the Arab and African countries at large, this has always been Egypt's work throughout history. But some would say that Egypt is doing that just for its national security or for a certain benefit. How do you describe Egypt's efforts so far, and how do you describe Egypt's trials in order to settle matters in the Arab and African countries and continent through diplomacy and economy?
You see, when you say that some are seeing it for the interest of the national security of Egypt and the others say for other reasons, I mean, there is no difference between the two, because the national security of Egypt is related to the national security of all the Arab countries. What affect them affect us, and vice versa.
Indeed.
So this is very important. And number two, the presence and the movement by Egypt and the action taken, whether it is a statement by the president or the prime minister or foreign affairs, it's all it rings a bell that we are here, we are monitoring, we are interested, and we are pursuing the process in order to ensure that Libya is finally would move to the right direction. So the national security of Egypt is part of the national Arab security.
Indeed. Indeed. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has recently given his directives for all institutions in Egypt to try to work with, in all sectors in Libya for the reconstruction of Libya. How do you view the importance of such a step to help in advancing matters for a Libyan settlement?
It's a very important point that you raised, because the more the country is built up, is reconstructed, and it has the shape of a modern country, it's very important for these militia and mercenaries not to go into the small alleys and continue their fight and so on. So the more you build and reconstruct, the more stability could be achieved. So this is a very important part, and thanks to Egypt that we are taking care of this, and we are working with all the debris that happened during the last 10 or 11 years.
Indeed, indeed. Before we move on to Africa at large, because Libya is part of the Middle East and is part of Africa.
Right.
And Egypt has been working for the Middle East and for Africa. But yesterday was the Africa Day. So the intensity of the efforts have always contributed to deepening Egypt's African identity. Before we move on with our discussion, let's first take this report and Egypt's African identity. Let's watch.
Egyptian identity is a pivotal element in shaping the cultural features of the Egyptian personality, an identity that was formed from a mixture of the Arabic language and Islamic Coptic, Mediterranean and African backgrounds. The last few years have been characterized by an increase in Egypt's activity, not only in the Nile Basin region, but also in the heart of the continent through the African Union, the AU, which Egypt has chaired in February 2019. Egypt's presidential diplomacy has also brought about a renaissance in African relations, and the Egyptian support for human development efforts in the various countries of the African continent has become ever more evident. This is taking place through the dispatching of thousands of Egyptian experts, the reception of thousands of African citizens for training in Egypt, and the diversity of fields and interests of the Technical Fund for Cooperation with Africa of the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The latter has worked on judicial cooperation, police cooperation, educational programs, medical aid, food aid, and courses for African diplomats. Egypt is working in parallel to deepen relations with the African continent through various agreements and projects and the implementation of many infrastructure and logistics programs in the heart of the continent. Egypt has signed 19 military agreements with African countries, underlining the fact that Cairo is distinguished by the presence of a large number of African military personnel who receive training at the Nasser Academy in the capital every year. Egyptian diplomatic initiatives over the last 2 years reflect Egypt's openness to Africa within the framework of the intensification of parallel plans on several levels. On the educational level, Egypt is opening the door to giving more scholarships and offering various grants in its universities and institutes to African students economically. The African Continental Free Trade Area creates sustainable opportunities and opens the door to mutual benefits between Egypt and the African countries. Cairo is also an active member of many African organizations and blocs, including the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, which is the largest economic grouping on the African continent. Among the aspects of Egypt's AU presidency has been the launch of the operational phase of the African Free Trade Zone, the signing of 13 memoranda of understanding and agreements worth $3 billion in the activities of the Africa Forum, and the doubling of the activities of the Egyptian Agency for Partnership for Development in Africa. There are now more and more opportunities in Africa that emerge from economic cooperation and the exchange of experiences and actions to protect water security. The intensity of these efforts has further contributed to deepening the country's African identity, advancing integration among the countries of the continent, erasing any negative or exclusionary images of African Arabs, and providing direct connections to building a common awareness of the continent's issues and challenges.
Right, welcome back. And indeed, Africa, this beautiful continent, our grassroots, Africa has everything, has it all. And back to you, Ambassador Telawy, and recently, or in the last few years, we have seen an increase in activity by Egypt and by the Egyptian leadership in the heart of the continent, and particularly through the African Union. How do you view the recent moves by Egypt in order to get much or further engaged in the continent's causes?
You see, President Sisi shared the African Union in 2019. He was the head of for a year. And Since then and before even, wherever President Sisi goes, he mentions Africa. He pleads with the world to take care of Africa, to remove the debt of the African continent, to help the African with all kind of humanitarian assistance, like during the COVID-19 and the need to have this vaccination there, and also the COP27 that will take place in Egypt in November. He mentioned Africa and their role, and he asks for help to the African to be engaged in having a green environment, because they did not cause the pollution.
Indeed.
It was the industrialized country who did so. So there are rights for the African that was taken by the foreign powers, and they know that all the treasure are in Africa, and that's why they fight among themselves, China, Russia, America, and Europe and so on, to get all the raw material that has been in Africa. The president is always reminding the world of the duties that they owe to Africa, because did not take its proper share. I'll tell you a story. I was representing Egypt in the Atomic Energy Agency in the beginning of the 90s. And in one of the meetings, I found that the regions of the world have an agreement with the Atomic Energy Agency on the peaceful uses of the atomic energy, except Africa. So I asked the question, why there is no similar
representation,
similar agreement to help Africa with the nuclear peaceful
yes, peaceful energy, yes.
And the answer was very abhorrent. They told me because they are underdeveloped and they cannot afford the nuclear technology. I said, well, this is a thinking of
unjustified thoughts.
Not only unjustified, it's really استعماري, colonizing thinking. Why on earth, if you know that it is these countries are poor and underdeveloped, why don't you use the highest technology ever to improve their situation? And as a result, I went and had an example of the Latin American agreement, and we copied one for Africa, and I moved to all the embassies, African embassies in Vienna, to get the signature of the ambassador, and here we have an agreement on a joint agreement between the continent and the Atomic Energy Agency, and since then the X-rays and the use of the peaceful use of the atomic energy to get to kill the kind of mosquitoes and
malaria that are causing malaria and
yes,
those viruses, yes.
And also for the fruits and citrus in particular, zubabt al-fakha.
The flies.
Yes, it was difficult to kill this fly, except with nuclear energy. So you could improve the situation of the vegetable and fruits by having the radiation over it, so you can export it for a longer period. Anyway, there, in addition to medical steps and agricultural issues, so every year now we have a group of African member states coming to Egypt to be trained on these issues, radiation and how to keep the food and to kill the flies that are not killed by the normal toxic issues. So I'm saying that Egypt is always thinking of Africa, whether at a lower level or a higher level, but it was intensified when Sisi came. In every step on the way, he is always thinking of Africa, and he's a lawyer for Africa, debt and assistance and removing all the difficulties that Africa is having.
Let's say that President Sisi has tried his best in order to speak on behalf of Africa in all international forums and represent the causes. The problem is, do the world want a rise of Africa? That's a big question. But anyway, Egypt has been working through different spheres and angles. We're speaking about settling conflicts. We're speaking about an economic rise through different movements, the African Continental Free Trade Area, this agency, partnership agency that we have made, its existence in several blocks. From your point of view, how has Egypt repeatedly affirmed its keenness to enhance cooperation with African countries, not only the Nile Basin, but with African countries at large?
It is very clear that Egypt has a relation with all these economic groups that have been established in East or East Africa or West Africa, South or the Middle, and so on. Number two, Egypt is always fighting terrorism since so many years, and if there is no security in Africa, there is no investment, no economic improvement. So also the president is fighting hard against terrorism, especially in West Africa and the Sahel in particular, Mali and the other country. So in many areas, it's not only the Nile-based issue, but whether economic, whether security, whether fighting terrorism, he is speaking loudly against all of these
Finally, and this is my last question.
Are you sure?
Yes,
The
I
last-
have only last question that I need an answer in one country, in 1 minute. I'm sorry. Marking the Africa Day, President Sisi congratulated African people, saying it represents a great history memory that established a new era. What is the new era that Africa needs at this upcoming stage? And please, briefly.
The new era is cooperation among the country. Stop the fighting of tribes and changing the political situation by war, like what we saw in the Tutsi and
Yes, all the conflicts in Africa.
in this conflict, because this became and the image of Africa is related to the kind of fight between tribes and changing the government through this method.
Yes.
And Burundi was one, Rwanda or Burundi was one major flagrant
Yes.
example. So what we need is to pursue the policy of peace and security.
Exactly. And at that, I leave it here. Peace, security, prosperity. Your Excellency, Ambassador Mervat Telawy, former Undersecretary of the UN, we thank you so much for being with us tonight. It was an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dear viewers, many thanks for watching. Next debate will be on Sunday. Until then, good night.